Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow me, yeah, follow me. I'm hoping to see the day when my people can all relate. We must stop fighting to achieve the peace that was taught in our country. We shall all be free. Follow me. Why don't you follow me to a place where we can be free? Come with me over there and into racial hatred, and let's learn to share. Can you feel it? It's in the air. Now it's time for change. Time for us to care. Follow me. Why don't you follow me to a place where we can be free? We will all be free.
Make moves that start movements. Hennessy, the spirit of the NBA.
What's up, folks? What's up, folks? What's up? What's up, folks? Hi. Let's go. Come on in. Let's go. We don't own these rights, but we gonna party with it. Let's go. Come on. Hey. Hey. Where your friends at? Tell them, come on. Tell them. Tell them. Let's go. Come on. Where your friends at? Tell them they better come on. Cause we partying. Welcome. Welcome. Hey. Y'all better party. It's a Monday, baby. And y'all are here. Where you at? I see you. Y'all drop them comments. Let's go. Let's go. Get it, get it, get it. I see you, Ray Garcia. Katrina, what's up, baby? AK. AK. Let's go. Let's go. Hey, 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 hey. Hey, Trey. It's a Monday, baby. Let's go. Uh-huh. What you here for? Let's go. When I walk in, past the mirror. Past the mirror. Let me cut that down because Facebook be hating and YouTube definitely be trying to cut the music off. What's up, folks? How you guys doing? Oh, y'all in here. What's up, Charlie? Red Garcia. Kiki, we see you. We see you. Listen, Aaron, we here, baby. Tell y'all friends. If they not here tonight for the kickoff, you understand what I'm saying? We are here for the kickoff of the Brothers Obtaining and Navigating Dynamic Solidarity. Bonds for the folks that need letters. Bonds, understand? Transmen and Transmasculine Week of Affirmation and Resilience 2021. I had to drink a lot of water to say that all at the same time, so appreciate it and give me a thumbs up because I'm fluffy and I ain't even sweat when I said it because we ready to turn up. Let's go. Tell your friends. Come on. Hey, hey. I know what y'all want to do. I already know what y'all want to do. Where y'all at? I know y'all. I see them numbers coming. Tell y'all friends. I'm just partying until y'all get here. This the ride home until you can plug in your laptop and get in for real. And tell them kids go sit down somewhere. Tell your partners leave you alone. You at a conference. Treat it like church. Tell them mind their business, baby. Because we here for day one. Let's go. Y'all better party with me. I only had 1 cup of coffee today and I ain't even ate breakfast. Y'all better dance with me. And what y'all watching don't know, I changed my clothes in 2 minutes, baby. Y'all better turn up. Let's go. Let's go, baby. I see you. I see you. Y'all better tell y'all friends. If they not here, then I don't know where they at, like TikTok say. Let's go. What's up, Charlie? What's up, Britain? Okay. We like church. I went too far. I went over my time and I want to be respectful of my contract. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome, welcome, welcome to day one of Brothers Obtaining and Navigating Dynamic Solidarity, also known as Bonds. Transmen and Transmasculine Week of Affirmation and Resilience 2021. Tonight is day one, baby. They done hired my old ghetto ass to come on here and introduce this dynamic event. Okay, you understand what I'm saying? Y'all done took off early from y'all night job or didn't go to work at all to sit here and be here for day one, the state of the Transmen and Transmasculine community. I'm your host, ladies and gentlemen, T. Pearson, the E and the I is silent. Blame my parents, not me. And I'm also the founder of the T. Pearson Experience, also known as TPX. Get into it, follow me. I'm mixed over there on my page. So don't judge me. Judge the obstetrician that delivered me. But listen, I'm not your host. I just came on to talk some trash until y'all got here in y'all seats. But we appreciate you tuning in. I'm going to do a quick handoff to one of the folks that is in charge of the whole thing, baby, because it ain't me. You understand what I'm saying? Let me see if he back there eating all them peanuts in the green room. Tyree! Somebody got eyes on Tyree? Can we get Tyree to the stage? All right, listen, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, y'all still loving the vibe. Let me get these comments up here. So for the folks that don't know, if you comment, we can see you. If you comment, see this right here. Look, this could be you on YouTube, and you can tell your friends that your comment was on Real Live TV because this is a big event, baby, and we is here for it all. You understand what I'm saying? Ryan, what you say? Ryan, how we on your nerves already? Ryan, you go in time out. We're going to come back to you, Ryan. We're going to come back to you. Listen, I need y'all to help me bring in. Let me give me some music. I'm going to need me some music. I'm going to need me some music to bring in Mr. Tyree. Mr. Tyree, where you at? Do y'all got eyes on Tyree back there? Hey, ladies and gentlemen, help me bring to the stage one of the founders of Bonds, baby. He goes by the name of Tyree, or y'all can call him King, baby. Let's go.
Hey.
Tyree, where you at, baby? Where you at, Tyree?
What's going on?
Thank you. Talk to the people. Let me go back here and eat these free.
Oh man, thank you, T. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Welcome and thank you. The state of the Transmen and Transmasculine community panel. I am Tyree Williams, he, him, and I serve as the Director of Outreach for Brothers Obtaining and Navigating Dynamic Solidarity, Bonds, if you don't know, if you haven't heard already. This panel will address the needs, issues, adversities, and lived experience of those who identify as trans men and or transmasculine. We are very excited for our first event for the inaugural Trans Men and Transmasculine Week of Affirmation and Resilience 2021. We're going to give folks a few moments to join us. So while we're waiting, please let us know some of your thoughts in the chat. Use one word to describe how you feel at this moment. Looking forward to seeing your responses. We'll get started shortly. Please share this stream in your networks. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyree. I am Royce Hall. I'm tonight's moderator. Now, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so that we know how to participate in tonight's event. We are utilizing StreamYard to broadcast this event simultaneously on Facebook as well as on YouTube. There is a portion of this panel in which we will solicit questions from the audience. So please type your questions into the chat at any time. Our chat monitors will collect your questions on all platforms so they can be asked to the panelists during the Q&A portions of tonight's panel discussion. We understand and affirm those who want to remain anonymous. Therefore, when you submit your question, please indicate if you would like to remain anonymous. Also, share this stream in your networks. Now, let's get to know our panelists. We have assembled an incredible group of folks who will now introduce themselves to our audience, starting with Dr. Kellan Baker.
Thank you so much, Royce. It's a thrill to be here. Very happy to have the opportunity to join you all to talk about issues affecting those of us who identify as trans men or transmasculine folks. My name is Kellan. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the executive director of the Whitman Walker Institute, which is the research, policy, and education arm of Whitman Walker, which is a federally qualified community health center in Washington, D.C., with over 45 years of serving DC communities, particularly LGBTQ folks and people living with HIV. I am a research and data nerd. I'm a real fun person to invite to your holiday parties because I'll get you up next to the punch bowl in the kitchen and start talking about why it's so important to collect demographic data on aspects of who we are, such as sexual orientation, gender identity, race, ethnicity, all of the things that make up our backgrounds, comprise the story of who we are, what experiences we've had, and what we and our communities need. In my role at Whitman Walker, I am charged with building out a research portfolio that does exactly that, gets more information about who we are as individuals, who we are as families, as groups of friends, and as a community of folks living both in DC, the DC area, and all across the country. Our research primarily focuses on the experiences of people living with HIV. We also do a lot of research related to transgender health. And in our policy work, we focus primarily on working both with the DC government and with the federal government, particularly when we have better partners there now as than we had in the previous couple of years on making sure that the federal government's initiatives, whether that's policy, programs, budgets, whatever it might be, is reflecting and addressing the needs of our communities. So I am very happy to, again, have the opportunity to talk with you all. By way of sort of my personal background, I transitioned in 2005, and I just now succeeded in growing this beard. So I'm really proud of it, despite its sort of continued patchiness. But so I'm going on more than 15 years of living my life out loud. And as I say, thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with all of you. And so, Royce, can I hand it back over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. We are so glad to have you with us. Next, we have Tajir Hawkins.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I am Tajir S. Hawkins, and first I want to say thank you so much for having me on this panel. Looking at everyone up here, y'all look amazing. I just want to put that out there. First and foremost, I am a man of trans experience. I just celebrated my anniversaries now, so yay me. About 12 years in. I am a filmmaker and an actor. I have a few short films and web series out there. And yeah, like I said, I'm just looking forward to sharing and learning from everyone on this panel tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us, Tajir. Up next, we have Mase.
Hey everyone, my name is Mase III. I use he, him as pronouns. Currently based in Seattle, Washington. I am a poet, I'm an educator and author, and I'm currently the co-director of a project, an organization called the Black Trans Prayer Book, where we are focused on creating space for the stories and healing the religious trauma of Black trans folks within many different religious contexts and or people that feel pushed out of religious spaces and are looking again to heal from their religious trauma. Currently, right now, we're working on a documentary, and I'm just really excited to join the rest of y'all out here as we talk about our experiences and community needs.
Thank you so much, Mase III. And lastly, we have Mateo Presente.
Hey folks, I go by Mateo Presente, sorry. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a trans Latino from Tijuana, Mexico, but I've been based in DC for around 5 years now. I'm currently the international programs manager at an organization called the LGBTQ Victory Institute based here in DC. But prior to that, and most of the time I've been in DC, I've been in the policy advocacy space, organizing space, right at the intersection of LGBTQ rights and criminal justice. So I worked a lot around policing, conditions of confinement, a lot around sex work decrim, and I'm also currently on the board of an organization called Just Detention International. Hey, Louis. And, you know, like the entire time I've been in this space, mainly in the national space, I don't think that there has actually been like an entire week dedicated to specifically talking about trans men and transmasculine communities. So I wanted to like appreciate the fact that this is happening and I feel blessed to have been invited. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Mateo. I'm excited about tonight's panel. I'm really, really hyped up about tonight's panel. So let's jump into the discussion. So our first question is, how does visibility affect trans men, transmasculine communities? Do you think trans men and transmasculine communities have the visibility and support needed to thrive and survive?
Since I started off with data collection, I can jump in to say that that's really why I think so much about data collection, because as I say, at the end of the day, data are just stories. They're just stories about who we are, what our experiences have been, and what we need. And I think with regard to trans men and transmasculine folks, there is a great deal of invisibility. In a lot of ways, that helps make us safer. It allows, in many cases, for some of the things that are said or done to trans folks, to trans women and trans feminine people in particular, to pass us by. but it also means that there's a real lack of understanding of all of the diversity of our experiences, again, who we are, what we need, and how to make sure not only that we're getting our needs met in terms of sort of day-to-day experiences, but also making sure that folks in positions of power in the government, for example, folks who are drawing up budgets, making policy, passing laws, really recognize that we have specific needs and specific encounters with transphobia, specific encounters with ableism, with racism, with all of the other different ways that our societies try to tell us who matters and who doesn't. And so having more information, more data, more stories, more visibility about who we are helps us build the power that we need to ensure that both us and our elders and the next generation of folks coming up after us can have access to the resources, the safety, the opportunities that we need to be who we are and to live authentically as ourselves in safe communities, safe families, and just to, I feel like I'm like rambling because I feel so strongly about data collection that it's like hard to just capture it all in one little piece. So I will wrap up my ramble by saying that there is not enough visibility of trans men, and particularly of trans men who don't look like me. Little white boys, when there are opportunities for trans men to be visible, it's often this face. And this face is not the face of the true diversity of our trans communities. And so we need more opportunities to share our stories and more opportunities to be seen and heard.
Absolutely. Great, great. Would anyone else like to share their thoughts on this question?
Tajir here. Sorry, I had to put on a hat, y'all. My head was just a little too shiny on this camera. But I think visibility inspires people and gives them the hope and strength to be who they really are. It gives them courage to come out as transgender or gender non-binary, and help them to start using their preferred pronouns. It also changes the attitudes of society. It can help destigmatize transgender identities and open people's mind. Now, there is a little more visibility than what it has been over the years, thanks to social media. But right now, what we need to take action. We need our rights and our protection of justice and exception. So yeah, we need to take action on those as well. But now that we're more visible.
I can add a little bit. Yeah, so I appreciate what Kellan said around data, because that's not where my mind went when I thought about visibility, but of course it's a huge part of it. But when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking that there's just like a huge set of diversity of experience within the trans community, particularly like trans men, transmasculine folks. And thinking of it as like, okay, well, what have I seen out there that might be like an accurate representation of like us as a community, right? Like as a complete aggregate. And I was thinking that a lot of the examples that I was coming up with are somewhat tokenizing. Of course, these are individual folks, but then like their presence ends up being like tokenized as like a sort of like standard experience. When even like you can put two famous trans men side by side and their experience just looks very different. So like I was just thinking about this question, thinking about visibility, and of course what Kellan said and what Tajir just said around like long-term culture change, right? Like there's an immediate benefit of like seeing somebody on TV, in a magazine, in a show, somewhere that you feel seen and represented, right? Of course, like what Tajir just mentioned, that like that's very important to an individual person, and it also like does a long-term service, right, of changing the culture, changing the perception, increasing acceptance, X, Y, and Z. But it doesn't necessarily like change the fact that like my doctor might still be an asshole, like it's not going to make me any more safe or any less vulnerable to discrimination tomorrow or today or the next day, right? So I'm thinking about what are the outcomes that we expect from visibility? And then asking, like, can visibility alone get us that? And like, what different things need to go into that visibility, and where are the gaps, right, that change our immediate situation today, tomorrow, while still doing the work of culture change, while still doing the work of supporting artists who are trans men, who are transmasculine.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyone else want to give any final thoughts on that particular question?
Just one other quick thing that I wanted to say with regard to what Mateo was getting at in the concrete outcomes of visibility. For me, I had to be dragged kicking and screaming out of the trans closet because someone happened to see me. Someone happened to realize that I was a baby trans when I was 20 or 21 or so. And they said, you know what? They weren't trans, but they said, I have some people that you need to talk to. And so I went out for coffee with someone, and he said, why do you think we're meeting? And I was like, I don't know. I'm certainly not trans, because I had never been able to imagine myself into a future where I was who I needed to be. And so having that person see me and point me to trans men that he knew who could help me with that journey. I call him the grand loin, and I am the fruit of his loins, because it's kind of been this generational thing of someone helped him come out, and then he helped me come out. And one of the reasons that I think it's important for me to be out about being trans in my experience is because we never know who's watching. We never know who might need to see a possibility model, someone who, I think that's Janet Mock's phrase, where you can actually imagine yourself into that future. And even for my parents too, I know that they had trouble imagining what my life could look like, and that scared them. And so having this example of who is this person who's living a life, has a family, has people who love them, has a network of friends and community, family. That was really important, both for me and for my own family as we were navigating my transition. So we never know who's out there who needs to see that possibility model.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you all for your input on our first question this evening. We do have a lot of comments coming in. Thank you to our audience for being so engaging and so present with us this evening. You guys are doing fantastic. Also, please do not miss the Black Trans Joy Brunch DC on November 21st from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Get your tickets. Please, we love to see you there. Let's see what else. The issue, Chris Avery said that the issue is that folks are doing it for the fame and not the work. We also have a comment from Kim. We are invisible, and the narrative then is driven by false politics and scenarios. So we're going to move on to the next question, because this feedback.
Royce, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
We're gonna move into our next question. This is a great segue. What barriers do you feel have the greatest effect on trans men and transmasculine communities?
I think that really depends on, which, because again, like as we're talking about this diversity of experience, to be a transmasculine and trans man person means so many different things about your reality, right? Are we talking about transmasculine folks who are disabled, transmasculine folks who are immigrants, transmasculine folks who are Black, brown, and indigenous, or everything else? To me, when I think specifically about the experience of being a Black transmasculine person in a country that is very heavily policed, and thinking about the barriers around coming into masculinity in a world that will further criminalize you, right? In certain types of spaces. I'm thinking so much about the ways in which we still experience a lack of access to our reproductive rights and adequate healthcare access for all of our folks, right? Especially in more rural areas. I'm thinking, versus I also see spaces, in which I feel like as transmasculine folks, we do have some a little bit of wiggle room, because I don't think that there's there's always still barriers, but I end up working a lot with schools and things like that. And oftentimes I'm in university settings in which 95% of the trans folks I might meet on a college campus are generally going to be transmasculine folks, right? Without sometimes an analysis of why that is, right? And even though transmasculine folks on those campuses still don't have everything they need, right? So I don't know if that fully answered the question, but to me, especially when it comes to healthcare, prison abolition, and just the prison system in general, I think those are the biggest barriers that are most urgent.
And would anyone else like to weigh in on this question? What barriers do you feel have the greatest impact on trans men and transmasculine communities?
I can share a little bit. So the one thing that kept coming up for me, and granted, typically I mainly organize around issues, not necessarily around like identity-based groups, but it's always been in the trans space. But one thing that I was thinking about when thinking about the barriers is it's kind of like twofold. One is that the conditions haven't been created within the movement for us to actually have like a trans masculine space, agenda, etc. Right? We've seen very intentional spaces created for other groups when it comes to like racial identity, or when it comes particularly to trans women, even non-binary spaces. But there is very little opportunity historically in the time that I've been involved in national spaces dedicated particularly to that in the way of resources, time, capacity, mentorship, leadership development. All of that has been lacking. And then the second thing is that, like Kellan said, like many times when trans people, trans men particularly make it, we fail to like recognize that there's people that got us there, right? Like that there's a whole entire community that if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have that opportunity to be where we're at. And a problem with that happens that I notice is that once somebody makes it, they're on every panel, they're on every session, they're in every conference, and then there's like limited opportunity for other folks. Now, I do believe that like folks should and deserve to also have the opportunity to have platforms and be visible. And if they like love being in the limelight, then like go for it, bless you. But at the same time, it is kind of like there's already limited spaces for us, right? So I do think that it's an entire ecosystem that has been set up for us to not have this space. And to some degree, I feel like even me personally, like I've sometimes like shut down conversations around men because I'm like, why do we need more spaces for men, right? And I've kind of fallen into that trap earlier years. And it hasn't been until more recently that I've really like felt like, no, there is a huge gap and a space for this to happen. And specifically hearing folks like Tyree for years be talking about something like this and not to see it materialize, that is something really necessary and needed, and it has been a long time coming. So it is a huge deal that the folks that organize this put this together.
Absolutely. And we do have quite the activity from our audience. Javon Martin actually said that one of the barriers, or a few barriers there, are homelessness, healthcare, education, jobs, and overall support. Chris Avery, different folks have different needs, and that's the issue for real. Also, needs vary by region, individuals, and age, which I think is also just as important when we look at the breakdown. Javon also commented again, coming from a provider view, there's a lack of participation from trans men. Anybody like to comment on that in particular as well?
I don't have a comment on what Javon said, even though that was great. Like, but looking at it, when I read this question, the first thing that went to mind for me is the lack of representation that we have in the film industry. Like, you don't see men like us on the screen or behind the screen. True, we don't know. We're not behind the screen, behind the camera as far as production crews. With my production company, I have trans actors, and they don't just play trans roles, they play cis men roles. And I have trans men who work behind the camera as well. There's a big lack there. Why? I don't know. Maybe people are not auditioning for certain roles, but I would like to see more men like us on the screen. That was the main reason why I started my production company, because you don't see a trans man. You know, even though I'm an actor, I'm not a trans actor. I am an actor, but I still want to see more actors on the screen. So that young or older trans man who is considering transitioning can look and be like, dang, they can do it, I can do it too. So yeah, I feel one barrier there is with representation. There's not enough out there for us.
I definitely agree with your comments about representation and the degree to which there's still so many limitations in how many slots, you know, and you've all touched on this in your comments. There's so many limitations on how many opportunities there are to show up and take up space as a trans man or as a trans person, just generally speaking. I mean, it's 2021 and we're trumpeting the fact that only now has the first trans man been included in People's Sexiest Men, right? And that's kind of like, okay, well, I mean, I would love to be included on that list, but like, that's not getting me healthcare. But it is important with regard to as we've been saying, the degree to which people can look and see that there is someone like me who is living, who is able to be who he needs to be. And to have somebody like Brian Michael Smith recognized on a list like that is, I think, really starting to get at some of those barriers of invisibility, of a lack of representation. And at the same time, the fact that there's like only one, right? It's sort of de facto, there's only one slot for a trans person because like, let's not get too excited. And we definitely see that in research, you know, when we're trying to apply for funding or we're looking for opportunities to do research, very much this idea of, oh, well, we funded a trans thing 5 years ago, so we think that's probably sufficient. And people just really not recognizing the degree to which there needs to be more than one, and there needs to be so many more opportunities for us to be seen, for us to be doing our work, for us to be making the connections and changing the narrative around who trans men are, who trans people in general are. And I think the two other barriers that I just want to quickly speak to, one is, I think, masculinity and the way that conversations around masculinity, and Mateo, you alluded to this a little bit, I mean, there are so many ways in which men are not encouraged or supported, or in some cases capable of being able to change this narrative around what does masculinity mean? What does it mean to be a masculine person? What does it mean to be a person who has seen all the different sides of gender, and being able to feel comfortable participating in conversations, both to say, you know, I have had experiences that are different from those of other men, and at the same time, I am a man, and that has a lot of baggage, a lot of ramifications, and it requires a lot of me. And so supporting ourselves and each other in embodying masculinity and using it for good is, I think, a very difficult thing for men in general. And so I think especially for us, when our masculinity is constantly being, on the verge of being questioned, or people trying to take it away, or people saying, well, you're not real. And then the last thing that I would say, just to some of the comments I've been seeing coming up around, in particular, healthcare. That's my area of work primarily, trying to address barriers to healthcare. And Mateo, you and I have worked on some of these issues in the past, issues such as exclusions of coverage for gender affirming care, the degree to which it's hard to find providers who treat us as real people rather than as specimens or spectacles. Making sure that we're seen as whole people, so that it's not just about gender affirming care, as important as that is, but it's also about like preventive screenings, right? If you've got the part, you got to get it checked out, things like that. And being able to find the healthcare providers, being able to find the insurance coverage, being able to get the access around issues of geography, around issues of ability, language, all of these things that are barriers to care for so many people above and beyond the experience of being trans. Those are, I think, some of the biggest barriers, and certainly the ones that I encounter the most in my work.
And that's the perfect way to segue into our next question. Also, I want to point out some things from our chat, from our audience. Socioeconomic barriers are huge. Everything in transition comes with a large price tag. Just think about name changes or gender marker changes. Large fees are often a part of what we deal with. Also, region or geographical location was a large one as well. And let's see, another good one, or there's lots of good ones to choose from, but we still got to address intersectionality and multiple identities, because sometimes I can get respectful trans care, but not respectful care as a Black trans person. Lastly, the stigma around passing, masculinity, and the toxicity. So we got a lot of activity in our chat. Definitely thank you once again to our audience. This is the perfect way to get into question number 3. In your expertise and experience, what are the 2 most important priorities for trans men in the transmasculine communities?
Just 2? Listen, I'm like, I think because something that's come up for me, even just in our conversation so far, that I think to me that I've really been meditating on lately is, especially as we think about the expansiveness of transmasculinity and the ways in which we experience ourselves in the world and how other people experience us. I'm always reminded that masculinity is older than the patriarchy, right? And that there's oftentimes not spaces for us to really wrestle with what does a masculinity that is not trying to ascend into cis hetero norms look like, right? I think that for me, kind of coming up in many different types of spaces, especially multi-gender trans spaces, in which there wasn't space to really to kind of connect on what does rebuilding masculinity look like? What does it mean for aside from like what my goals might be around my body and all these different pieces, but how does that mean how I'm going to interact with other people in my community? Even as we talk about this place around, as we even talked about visibility, I was thinking so many times of when I've heard the conversation about visibility, how it devolved and actually was antagonistic to trans women, when different things have come up around especially Black trans women's media visibility, not survival, not equitable pay, not all these other kinds of things, but because there's been a few Black trans femme and Black trans women folks that have gotten to ascend into some sort of household names, that was sometimes used against them in order to recenter the conversations, instead of starting from a place of we as transmasculine people need to be able to have space to talk about, undoing and recreating masculinity. I think also I'm really committed to talking about the ways that we experience so much sexual assault in transmasculine community and don't have places to process that, don't have places to access resources, don't have places to really deal with domestic violence and other sort of things, right? Even in trans affirming spaces that still don't know how to talk to us about the very real issues that we face with assault. There's 5 million different things I think we could focus on, but yeah.
Thanks, J-Mase. And would anyone else like to weigh in on this particular question?
Yeah, I can step in. I 100% agree with everything that was just mentioned. And like for me, the response to this question kind of sounds like Kellan's last contribution. Because like when I was thinking about this question, I was really thinking that there's like a massive shortage on mentorship and leadership development opportunities for trans men in general, because priorities are going to look different in every area, right? Like we already talked about like difference of experience and difference of identity and all that, but I definitely like I remember when I was coming up, I started my medical transition in 2013, and at that point, I was in college and I was organizing on a campus. There was very little programming dedicated to trans people in general, but there was they were starting some programming around toxic masculinity, particularly like for men, and I was like the only like trans guy at that time participating in that. But I remember there was also like there were just multiple spaces for me to be able to unpack all the things that I thought I needed to do to be seen. The way that I was performing masculinity definitely wasn't fitting with the way that like I am as a person. And I had to unpack a lot of that. And I remember the group that did a lot of that for me and just existing in that network is the Brown Boys Project. I'm not necessarily sure like they're still doing cohorts or anything, but stuff like that I feel like is something that should definitely be prioritized with folks that have the ability to organize something like that. And do something that isn't, I mean, yes, local is amazing, but let's make it national. Like, let's bring skills from the East Coast to the West Coast and do the same thing back and forth, right? I definitely think that there's a lot of folks, and I've seen, like, when I've traveled for conferences and people I've met tabling at different spaces, I see folks that are like definitely the type of leader that I would follow, right? But there is no, like, there hasn't been an opportunity given to them. They haven't been guided onto how to find an opportunity, how to be prepared to accept an opportunity when it comes your way. And I think that we lose out on so many, on like propping up so many folks that should have already been in those spaces, right? But I definitely think that that's one of the things that, you know, if I were in a different line of work and could and had all the resources available, that's something that I would want to invest in.
Sounds good. And we do have a question from the chat. Masculinity is older than the patriarchy. Thank you. Yes. This helps me think about this. What does a not dominating masculinity look like?
I think it means being in solidarity with comrades that are trans women and trans femmes. It means understanding that my job, to me, part of my job is being a traitor to patriarchy, right? It means that I'm not, you know, when I think there was a time for me, especially when I was kind of coming into myself and maybe not always feeling as, I don't know, as butch as the other men that I was around, right? Other places, going into spaces in which I would hear men say some really violent stuff, right? And say some very violent stuff to about other women, about even other trans spaces, when I heard even trans men saying sometimes violent things about trans women too, right? And sometimes I would shrink myself and I would just be so worried about being quote unquote found out or being the weird one out or something like that, versus just saying like, actually what you said was messed up. I remember being in a barbershop a few years ago, and the topic of the Me Too movement came up. And all these guys, everything was chill at first. I was like, okay, we're going to have a good day. Everybody's on stuff. Like, everybody's real clear on what they are and are not supposed to do. At some point, one of the older cats brings up Bill Cosby. Well, now the conversation takes a turn. And now he's talking about some other stuff him and his roommate used to do. It got into a really nasty, terrible space. And I was shaking. And at some point I told him, sir, you're disgusting me right now. I said, everything you're saying is disgusting. And so all these, you know, men that up until that moment I'd seen as the more, the ones that deserved to be in the space more than I did, I felt that way because I felt like I was just trying to be not seen or not witnessed. And when I said that, and I told him, and he was trying to backpedal, I said, everything you're saying, like, you're acting like this doesn't, like, what you're not talking about is violent, right? It's violent and it's not acceptable. Just because you got away with it does not make it okay. And then after that, there was like silence in that space for 10 minutes. And then eventually some of the other men came up to me and said, thank you so much for saying something. I thought I was the only one that thought that. And that's the day I think the glass shattered for me. Like, oh, cis heteropatriarchy is a trap too. Y'all not as butch as you think y'all are. Y'all not as in control of stuff as you think you are. Y'all also playing the game. y'all actually don't know how to step up and intervene either, right? And so I think it's really just taking responsibility every day, not just for the bad things that happen, but also, you know, allowing for our softness, allowing for us to be whole, allowing us to be healed, allowing us to be clear about our reality and not some mythology about what we were told manhood or masculinity is supposed to be.
And that comment is perfect for me to share one of our thoughts from our chat, which I thought was very poignant. Lewis Mitchell says, safe spaces to heal from our wounds. There's a tension for me as a Black man to even admit that I'm wounded. So definitely safe spaces for us to express our vulnerability, be transparent, spaces that affirm us in our various spectrums of existence, but also allow us to express ourselves and find the middle ground or a place to actually heal without us feeling that our feelings are invalid, so, or feeling ignored. So we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to open it up to our audience for a brief moment. Let's see. We have one more question before that. So how can the trans community be more accepted?
I struggle with the framing a little bit in that, because the idea of acceptance by a toxic patriarchy that's hell-bent on our and everyone's destruction, I think I really took to heart the point of that Jay Mase was making about being a traitor to the patriarchy, and so not looking for acceptance from systems that are unacceptable and that have to change, not only so that we can survive, but so that our friends, our families, all of us as people on this planet can survive. And so I think that's really, you know, it comes up a lot in sort of similar framing of tolerance, and trying to think about, you know, how do we get to the place where we can tolerate each other or tolerate difference or whatever, and really thinking about how to make it be about the celebration and about that we are not just integrating ourselves into existing systems, but we are changing them from in the process of our entering them and in the process of trying to rebuild them, and being agents of change, traitors to the patriarchy, using the privilege that can come with masculinity to be in spaces where we wouldn't have been able to get into maybe before, and actually saying, you know, guess what? There's a new perspective in this room, and maybe you didn't see it coming, but here it is. And I think another key component of that for me I also picked up on Lewis Mitchell's comment about safe spaces and acknowledging our wounds. I think a lot about kindness to each other and kindness to ourselves. I have had to read and reread some of those, you know, these ideas about the things that you say to yourself. Would you say that to a loved one? Would you say that to your best friend who is going through something hard? And because I find myself doing that a lot. Why are you not enough? Why are you not right? Why are you not doing what you need to do, or showing up in all the right places and doing it all at once? And, you know, the sort of nasty self-talk that comes along with that. And that can really easily spill out into nasty things to others, and creating spaces that don't feel safe. And so really thinking about how to start with ourselves, start with myself, and start talking to myself the way I would to a beloved friend or to a beloved sibling, to say, you know what, it's really fucking hard, and we're all doing the best we can, and being there for each other really starts with being there for ourselves. And so looking for spaces and opportunities and language, because often we don't even have the language sometimes for some of these, the word that keeps coming to my mind is grace, right? That's one of the reasons why religion, my church, is so important to me, because it gives me some of those words justice, mercy, grace, forgiveness that are kind of hard to access in so many other parts of our lives. And so really trying to look for those places where I can bring those words, bring those ideas to bear on myself, how I'm showing up with myself, and how I'm then showing up in community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'd like to jump back over to our chat for a second to just share a few comments with everyone. One in particular, Xavier Tiley, we need to start to accept each other first. Some trans are very divided. But I would also like to jump back to Lewis Mitchell, who pointed out everyone doesn't want to be an activist, artist, or even out, but we all deserve to be cared for and room for self-care and as much community as we desire. So would anyone else like to weigh in on this particular question?
I'd just like to say to that last comment from Lewis, a couple of years ago at Creating Change, there was a question that was posted in a trans group, or I think it was a POC space actually. And the question was like, if your personal mission for social justice was met, and you wouldn't have to be doing any more social justice-y type of work, what would you be doing? And the answers that some people gave were just, off the wall. Like I personally said, like carpentry, right? Like I'd love to do something with my hands. I'd love to do hair or something like that. And this last year during the pandemic, I've been sitting a lot with that, because once you do become one of these like quote unquote spokespeople, right, that you do start making the circuit and you do start getting recognized, et cetera, then it becomes kind of like something that you didn't choose for yourself, right? Like to some degree, like folks keep pulling you into these spaces. And there's like little regard for the spoons that you have. Like if you live with anxiety, if you live with like chronic pain or anything like that, the amount of sexual harassment and sexual violence that you experience while out in the circuit, right? And thinking like, damn, like wouldn't it just be great if I could like work at a restaurant and like just live my life and be happy. But I mean, that's just something that I've thought about, and thinking that like people do deserve that. Like we deserve that. Like every single one of us deserves that. And thinking about how can we continue to build a movement that is interconnected, that is intersectional as best it can be, and still kind of like get us to where we need to be as a community. That, I mean, trans men, transmasculine people come out at any age, right? So it's not like we're talking about everyone's in college, right? Like, or everyone is in high school when they're coming out. So there's different things that we need at the times in which we're coming into our identities. So yeah, I'll just leave it there. I was rambling at that point.
All great. All great. Thanks so much. We're going to get into our next question. We have a couple of more. We're going to open it up to our audience after this question. What roles can politicians, founders, community-based organizations, and nonprofit organizations play to better the quality of life for trans men and transmasculine communities?
I think, again, for me, it's simply being able to provide more spaces for us to talk about the violence that we experience. It is honestly creating spaces, especially, I was in a group that was sort of created very organically, specifically for Black trans people who experience domestic violence. And it was just like a simple Facebook group, and I think it was transformative for me, right? It wasn't held by an organization. It was simply just a guy who experienced it and was like, hey, I know we've all been talking here, like, let's actually just get together. And so I think about what would happen if that group had money to provide resources for people who had, like, some actual folks who have been trained in mental health or mental wellness and healing justice to be there. Like, what kind of tools could happen? Even like what would happen if, to be able to create some support around accountability when we experience harm or things like that. So I think these things get really left out and we're just expected to ignore it. But we are some parts of the community that experience huge amounts of sexual assault and DV all the time.
And just what, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that, Royce. I think they should engage more with us. Like these panels here, they should be tuned in to these panels, to the support groups. They should come out and hear us, hear stories, understand what it is. Try to, well, let me see, understand, maybe that's not the right word, but just listen to our stories and see our needs and our cares, and, just understand that we go through stuff as well, and we need help. And people with those communities, the politicians, et cetera, they are the people who can actually help us. But if they don't know, if they don't engage and align themselves with us, they really don't know what all is entailed. They just hear, yeah, transgender, and a lot of them jump on the bandwagon like, I'm for transgender, but they don't do stuff. They don't do anything because they really don't know about the transgender community. So yeah. Again, I just feel like they just need to engage themselves in our spaces to feel what the trans community is actually dealing with, suffering with, and going through. Yeah.
And I'd like to jump over to the chat real quick before anyone else shares their thoughts. Lewis Mitchell pointed out, all of you are my dreams come true. Now I get to do what I want to do because you are here. Also, Javon Martin pointed out, hire trans men, hold space for trans men. Let's see what else we have here. Chris Avery, pay trans men, invite trans men to sit on the boards. Anyone else would like to give any feedback specifically on those few comments, as well as the question in general?
I think another thing that comes up for me, because y'all talked also a lot about data pieces today, right? So I think just even being able to further aggregate data, like how much data is there specifically on the experiences of Black, Brown, Indigenous, trans-mass people, right? How much is there data specifically on Black, Brown, trans-mass people who are disabled, who are immigrants, who have experienced police and violence from the incarceration systems, all that kind of stuff. I see so much data that flattens our experiences to the trans-mask experience, which is often so dishonest about what we're actually experiencing around financially, like what we're experiencing around the houselessness piece, what we're experiencing around just systemic oppression overall.
Yeah, on the point about data collection, that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to talk about it, because when we don't collect data on trans experience, on gender identity, however it's collected, however it's defined, then we lose opportunities to break that data down to look specifically at not some sort of homogenous, singular trans man experience, which would almost 1000% be some white, from communities that look nothing like the majority of who we actually are. Collecting more data so that we can actually look at the experiences of Black trans mask folks, of folks who are differently abled, of folks who speak a language other than English at home. Like when we're not collecting the data, we are just like restricted to just the most basic top line numbers that tell nothing about the diversity of our experiences. And at the same time, as we're collecting data, and I noticed a comment about research, there's a really, there's a rush on right now in trans research and sort of health equity research more broadly, that folks like Elle Lett, who's a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, has written and spoken about quite eloquently this issue of health equity tourism, of all of a sudden the trans health equity anti-racist work is hot. And so all of these, if I may, jerks who have no investment in the health, well-being, success of us and our communities are rushing in and are taking those limited opportunities that we have to learn more about who we are and to be in those positions of leadership. Because that is, I think, the last critical piece that I want to underscore is the points that have been made about hire us, put us in charge. Because the sort of telephone game that happens when researchers or politicians or community-based organization leadership who aren't from our communities, even when they want to do right, it's just a game of telephone, and the message gets garbled and the intentions maybe start out well, but the impacts are often bad. And so stopping with this whole, like, I'm all for allies, yay allies. And also a key role of an ally is to get the heck out of the way so that the people who actually know what these experiences are can do the work we need to do and get the resources that we need to do that work. And so all of this, you know, well, we love to write about trans folks. We love to do research on trans folks. We just really want to highlight trans folks. Like, that's great. And how about you step aside and give actual trans folks that microphone, give actual trans folks the opportunity to do that work, to have those resources, to be in those roles, etc.
Definitely. I like to jump over to our chat one moment, and then we're going to open up the floor for our audience before we get to our last two questions. Charlie Burton pointed out we need to see more trans politicians, more trans doctors, nurses, more trans men, chairmen of boards. Allow us to run their organizations. How do we create these people in these roles? More college scholarships, organizations. If you get our grants, make sure the grants are being used for us, which I think is definitely make sure that it's benefiting us. Also, we have so much activity. Thank you all for joining us this evening. There was one other, let's see, pay us livable wages when their cause, pay us livable wages, basically. Let's see, another one that I saw that caught my eye. Make sure trans surveys are actually reaching all trans people, not just white privileged trans men, but trans people of color, trans in rural areas. And I can speak from that myself. Living in a rural area for just a couple of years, there were no resources. And I was not the only trans person in that particular location, but there weren't any conversations. There was no agency through language for power, even of affirmation for those individuals in that community with me. So that is very important. And let's now take some questions from.
Wait, Royce, can I add a little bit?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, so to agree with what everyone was talking about, and one thing that I just feel like just might help folks get kind of like an action step out of how to expect more out of these different sections of folks. Like, for example, all the organizations that are, and the sponsors that are supporting this event, you could get that too wherever you're at, right? So when I was starting out in my advocacy, I was on food stamps. I was literally super broke. I was an independent student because through family rejection and all that in college. And I wanted to do a bunch of things. I was baby trans, and I knew that there was a whole world out there that didn't exist in white rural Northern California. And I figured out where to go, where people were going, what people were talking about. And I found people to fund me. It sometimes looked like a GoFundMe, like a community-based GoFundMe, but a lot of the times it looked like going into different offices on my campus saying, how much money can you give me? But I had to be strategic about it, right? It wasn't just like fund my trip. It's like, I'm going to take these two other trans people who are lower level, like freshmen or sophomore people, and take them to do these specific things. And these are the outcomes that they're going to get out of this. And then we're going to come back and bring back what we've learned to our community, right? So like being strategic about how to ask for your projects to be funded. But I'm pretty sure that if y'all are the people to sit on a Monday afternoon and watch a panel and engage with us in this way, you probably have a lot of great ideas. You probably just don't have the access to the resources you need to materialize it, right? And it's always important to seek mentorship and to seek some kind of support in that, because you're not the first person to try to do that. There's somebody that already knows the barriers that they're going to face. So I do think that you can't just like cold call a politician, right? Like it has to be a strategy around it. You can't just ask a nonprofit to give you $10,000 to do a project when they've already submitted their budget and worked their budget into a year, right? But how can you be strategic about getting funds for what you need?
Can I add to that a little bit too? So just in that sort of vein too. So what I would encourage people though, because maybe you can't hit up every nonprofit like that. I will say a lot of the funding that I got myself with my colleague Lady Dame Figueroa Didi to fund some of our work for the Black Trans Prayer Book was really hitting up foundations and be like, hey, I know you said you like trans people, okay? I know that your grant cycle has passed, or I don't see anything that's specific to us, but I know you said you like Black trans people. So we're going to give you an opportunity to show up for us, right? So can you tell us how you can move some funds our way? So also just being okay with one, be okay with no sometimes. I'm really okay with no, because I don't need 50 million people to say yes. I just need a couple people with some dollars in their pocket to do that, But if you got a project, hit up some people that, again, said they like your community. Check it out and give them let them know that you are helping them be clear about their values.
Yeah, that was a real sort of game changer for me in thinking about fundraising when I was told exactly that, Mase, that a reminder that this is an opportunity to invite people to be part of work that they can value, that they can feel part of, and that it's not about, so often it's uncomfortable to think about trying to talk about organizational budgets and money and resources and all of these things because people get weird around it. But trying to reframe that for myself about look, this is about giving people an opportunity to be part of something. And a lot of people do want that. And so thinking that way about how to approach some of these spaces in particular, where folks have said, oh, I'm into health equity, I'm into trans issues, I'm into anti-racist work, I'm into all of these good things. Oh, okay, great. So here's your vehicle. And it looks like supporting me to do this good work that then you get to be a part of by dint of providing that support. And that reframing for me was hard, but was also a light bulb moment. Inviting people to be part of something, to be part of this movement, whatever it looks like.
Listen, and that part too, to be part of it, not to own it. Okay, you don't get to own my shit, my
right.
work, whatever, but you can be a part of how we got it done.
Exactly. You get to put your name on a brick somewhere on the My Hall of Fame, but write the check over to me, and we're not. I don't want to hear any more about what this work should look like from your perspective. That is a key. That's a key message for funders. Can be difficult to navigate for sure. I would, for those who are interested in nonprofit fundraising, I don't know, but I feel like I'm among friends here. The blog Nonprofit AF has a lot of really wonderful writing about equity and fundraising issues and ways, it's both useful for thinking about strategies and also cathartic because it's all about messed up funding practices at all different levels of philanthropy. But it also has some thoughts around, sort of strategies, folks who are doing work in ways that get around some of the ways that donors try to put their fingers on the scale, things like that. So Nonprofit AF for your light Saturday morning reading or whatever.
Definitely. And also, I just want to remind everyone to please get your tickets for the Black Trans Joy Brunch, November 21st, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Your ticket includes brunch and mimosas. And as promised, we will jump to the audience to take some questions. So if you have any, please drop them in the chat. We have a couple more questions after this particular segment. So one of our first questions for our panelists, do you think they truly want to be a part or just to get their name out there? Do you think do you think they truly want to be a part of our movement or just get their name out to score a point for themselves? Organizations, that is, or politicians, whomever.
Listen,
I will say that there's so many, and I can think, and I'm sure people can think of the same organizations that I'm thinking in my brain that I won't say out loud, that will give you money just so they say that they supported a trans person of color, And then they'll ride on that wave for a year, 2 years, and then 10 years later, they'll say like, hey, we supported this trans person a while ago. So I do think that folks need to be careful around that, but also money is green, right? And what you can do with that money, the impact that money can have sometimes outweighs kind of what you're giving in that exchange. Because to some degree, like you accepting money sometimes does seem like you are vouching for these organizations or for these foundations or for these people. But it's always like good to be clear up front if that's an issue for you and say that like, hey, I'll take your money, but I will not put you on my sponsorship page. I will not do X, Y, and Z. I will not promote your event, and I will not show up at wherever you want to show my pretty face. So you're also within your right to control that situation.
And would anyone else like to share before we get to our next question?
Yeah, just add on that, I consider that like coaching up. So I always tell people like you have a right to coach funders on how to treat you. A funder that does not talk to me well is not a funder whose money I'm going to take. Like, I don't care what it is. Like I've said no to money before with me and my colleague. We have very clear politics. Like this is what we believe in. You can help us with this or you cannot, but I'm not going to act like I should be grateful for your crusty, transphobic, anti-Black bullshit. I'm not excited about that, right? We are deserving of care, and especially in the LGBTQ community, being clear about the ways in which so much money has been made off the backs of trans people, that it's a return to doing what's right. That LGBTQ organizations really have to reckon with the ways in which they've allowed harm to come to trans people without actually worrying about our outcome or our care, right? But had our names in their mouths.
And as we spin off regarding community work, one question from Lewis Mitchell. As you pour into so many, what do y'all do to take care of yourselves?
Sounds like we're doing a bad job at it.
And then you jump in.
I'm like, I have an answer. I just didn't want to jump in real quick. But for me, it's been in, doing solidarity work with other, folks, with other community members, right? So I feel like what we don't talk about is the ways that so many, especially trans folks of color, get pushed out of 9-to-5 work. I, like many other colleagues, got pushed out of 9-to-5 work and ended up working for myself. I did not intend to be a full-time artist. It's just what happened, and so now I'm in a place where I specifically work with and organize with other Black trans folks all day. That's what I'm looking at the audience and seeing some folks I've worked with over the years. So it's nice to see so many friends and colleagues that are in the audience here today. But that way I only have to work with people and talk to people I like every day. It's a blessing. So.
I love that. And I think that helps me be a little bit more genuine with my response as well. I had to leave policy work, particularly like national policy work. It was literally so extractive. And, as an abolitionist working within a similarly like rigid system that is a nonprofit space, and then with particular like government, it became something that wasn't feeding me. And I believe that, like as a like brown trans person, I was put into positions where my work was causing me a lot of harm. And there was very little done to like support or repair any of the harm. So now I'm doing more like programming work, leadership development, training, and that sort of work, which is very, to me, it really fills me up with a joy and energy and excitement and hope more than anything. Seeing folks that are hungry and eager to be developed and to learn, that gets me going. And also I got a dog, which I am a huge dog person, and I go on a lot of walks with my dog, and it's helped me really manage my anxiety. And I think that another thing that I've done around that, around like self-care, is talk about my anxiety and talk about my chronic pain and be visible about that, and kind of like shatter the image that like, you know, people like to think that you're shiny and invincible, and they can like move you around and pull you and stretch you and mold you and do all these things to you, simply because, you know, you want the platform, or this is something you're going to want for the future or whatever. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Okay, and that takes us perfectly into a question from our chat. What do you think the most pressing research needs are? Are they just in the health equity field, or are there some more basic studies that are needed regarding the entire community or subcommunities?
One of the things that's handy about the field of health is that you can really talk about anything, because everything is a social, political, economic determinant of health. And the state of our bodies, our literal physical, mental health, is where we can really see so clearly and starkly, for better or for worse, the ways in which the systems, the extractive, the exploitative, the violent systems within which we're having to live and operate, the ways in which they hurt us. And so I think from my perspective, you know, when I say there's a lot of research to be done in the field of health, like really to me, that means literally everything, because again, the ways that all of these systems intersect with each other, interlock with each other to affect our health and well-being, regardless of whether they're specifically the health field, like doctors or nurses or hospitals or whatever, or whether they're the criminal justice system, immigration, employment, schools, our experiences walking down the street. You know, like there's all kinds of ways in which the work to be done to understand our health and well-being is looking for ways of better understanding and telling the story of what's happening across all these different domains. And I do think there needs to be a lot more basic research. There needs to be a lot more information out there that's literally like a question such as how many trans people are there in the United States? We don't know. We don't know how many LGBTQ people, broadly speaking, there are in the United States, because that sort of basic question isn't being asked in some really fundamental sources of information. And that again leads into the kind of invisibility that perpetuates this idea like, oh, we don't really exist. And if we do, there aren't that many of us. And anyway, who really knows, who really cares? Why should anyone bother? And so there needs to be, I'd like to send this message to my dissertation advisor, who really struggled with the idea of descriptive research. And I was like, no, you have no idea how many things we do not know, because they have been kept from us, because we have been told that we're not important. We have been deprived of resources. We have been deprived of mentors, of community, of opportunities to see ourselves and each other. And so the idea about using every opportunity possible to look more into the diversity of who we are, what our experiences are, what we need, that is, I think, the critical work of research of any kind. And, you know, again, from my perspective of the field of health, that being a place where we can really put fingers out into all these other areas and say, you know what, like all of these things are affecting our health and well-being. So let's talk about them.
Amazing, amazing. And this actually is the perfect segue to one more comment, and then we have our last question for the evening. Let's see. One that just got more basic studies are needed for sure, and understanding that much data collected does not speak to our community as a whole, because there are so many cultures that are not being considered. Lastly, the data on subcommittees is not completely accurate. For example, we missed the mark on intersex community data. So with that being said, our last question of the evening, and I also want to thank everyone for joining us in this amazing experience. How do you define power for trans men and transmasculine communities?
This could be me and my theology bag, but I think to me, power is understanding that to be, especially for those of us that are Black, transmasculine, men folks that are Black, brown, indigenous, transmasculine, and trans men folks, that, you know, we call ourselves into existence in a world that often doesn't see us. And so I think power is understanding the divinity of that, the absolute power of being able to ordain something for yourself that other people could never see, could never imagine, and do not have the capacity to do or understand.
I'm just gonna chime in and say it's really everything that we spoke about today so far. That's power. The power provides the capacity to bring about change. And like we discussed, some of the most important areas of focus and people for those changes. I mean, yeah, we do have our own personal challenges, but sometimes we need to take ownership of our own power and not wait for others.
Yeah, I struggle to find a clear definition. I think it's something I'm gonna keep trying to work on and develop, precisely again because I've seen most of my like life or trans experience. I've seen us as part of a trans community and not necessarily seen a community for ourselves. But it's a hard question for me to define. But I definitely think that one of our strengths is, to me, there's nobody that is more self-aware than trans people, simply because there's nobody that thinks about how they move their hand in public as much as we do, how they like flip their hair in public as much as we do, how they're carrying themselves, entering into space, how when you said something, you could have said it different, how your voice sounded. But at the same time, some of us aren't self-aware in other aspects of our lives, right? I'm not giving us a blanket pass, but I do think that is one of the strengths and the power that we bring into spaces. So I guess that's where I'm gonna keep thinking on this question as the week goes on.
And any last thoughts from anyone else?
Tajir, did you want to say something?
No, I said my piece.
Okay. I just aware how close we're getting to the end, and definitely don't want the last word. I think with regard to power, it's such a difficult concept to talk about because it is in the interest of those with power to keep it undefined and to make it feel undefinable and therefore unreachable. I teach a class called Policy, Politics, and Power in Health Equity, and it was really important to me to put the word power in the title because we love to talk about disparities. We love to talk about, these sort of ideas about what we can, what the problems are and a little bit about what we can do about them. But the powers that be, if you will, have a real vested interest in us not talking about power and not interrogating where it is, who holds it, and who does not have it. So it is hard to define power. I think, a little bit, as Jay Mase was saying, with regard to the divine, that I think of it as sort of two ends of a spectrum. One is the sort of that mysterious divine element of being who we are and taking up space and doing the work, whatever that work looks like for ourselves, for our communities. And then the other is like really intensely, the other end of the spectrum is like really intensely pragmatic, like who is making the decision? Who has the money? Who has the last word? And it really goes back to the conversation we were having a little while ago about putting trans people in positions of leadership where we are the ones who are responsible for determining the priorities, the ones responsible for spending the money, the ones responsible for having the final say about what's important, what we're going to work on, and how we're going to do it. And so I think it's getting more comfortable with talking about power and trying to wrestle from some of these systems, the engagement around, you have to talk to me about the power that you have, both because I need it, I want it, we need it in order to wield it on behalf of ourselves and our communities, and because it needs to be taken away from some of the places where it has traditionally been held, and figuring out how to have those concrete conversations about power and definitions of it. I really appreciate the question, because it sort of forces me to continue to try to think through, how do we define it so that we can identify where it is, where it isn't, where it needs to be, and we can actually make the moves to put it in our hands, to put it in the hands of folks who can use it to build better worlds.
Awesome, awesome. And once again, I'd like to remind everyone, please get your tickets for the Black Trans Joy Brunch, which is November 21st, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Your ticket includes your brunch and mimosas. Please make sure you keep in touch and up to date with Bonds hosting tonight's panel in this wonderful week of events on Facebook at Bonds 100. That's BONDS 100. On Instagram at bonds_org, and at www.bonds.org. And Bonds is spelled BONDSS. I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists tonight. Thank you, everyone in our audience, for joining us. Your participation, your feedback, and questions were so timely and so on point. And now I would like to hand it over to Lee. I'm Royce Hall. Thank you so much.
All right. Greetings, everyone. I'm Ely Dyer IV, and I serve as the Director of Development for Bonds. Thank you to each and every viewer. We really do appreciate your interest in this very important topic. Thank you to our moderators and panelists for a very engaging panel discussion. Bonds would like to give a special thank you to our sponsors, the Student Center for Equity and Inclusion and LGBTQ Campus Life at the University of Richmond, Black Trans Fund, Flux AHF, Gilead Sciences, the National Trans Visibility March, Human Rights Campaign Alabama, Virginia Anti-Violence Project, Diversity Richmond, and Nations Foundation. Please be sure to join Bonds for tomorrow's Transmen and Transmasculine Week of Affirmation and Resilience 2021 event. 6 p.m. to 7:30 Eastern Standard Time is the impact of COVID-19 on trans men and transmasculine communities panel via Facebook Live and YouTube. The panel analyzes the impact of COVID-19 has had on trans men and transmasculine communities in the realm of barriers to healthcare, housing, stable careers, and transition services. This panel will feature panelists Dr. Kellan Baker, Minister Paul Grace Neal, Colton Gibbons, J. Mel Ware, and the moderator, Kenya Hutton. Please share, like, subscribe to our social media, and thank you again for joining us, and have a great night.